Imagine working for an organisation whose structure is unconventional. So unconventional that it's effectively led from the grassroots level. Go! Hello, my name's Dan Gold and welcome to Fuse, the podcast for public relations professionals, communicators and marketers. On this episode, we dip a toe into the world of cooperatives and how communication strategy works in an organisation that could not be described as top-down. You can watch this episode in full by simply clicking the link in the notes of this episode or by visiting prca.org.uk/fuse. Just a note for you, since recording this episode, our guest has moved into another leadership role within Federated Cooperatives Limited. It's very rare that I get to speak to someone in my own province here in Canada. Normally we're speaking to people in different places around the world, and this is very exciting for me because the gentleman I'm going to introduce you to, Cam Zimmer, the Director of Communications and Public Relations for Federated Co-ops Limited, is someone who, I'm not going to flatter. Cam is someone I've looked up to since moving here because what the organization does that he works for really makes a difference to people's lives, whether they work for the organization or they're touched by the organization. Cam, welcome to Fuse.
Thanks for having me.
The vast majority of people in the other countries probably don't know about federated co-ops. So let's start with, what is the organization?
Sure. So federated co-ops, it's a bit of a mouthful, but really we're a co-op to co-ops. So the organization that I work for, it's really working for the brand of co-op, which some other countries have that as well. UK actually has a co-op brand and network that's quite prominent. So similar to that, the co-op that I work for serves 160 local co-ops across Western Canada. Each of those are independent. Technically, they're independent businesses. They have their own boards and members, and they serve their own communities. But all told, it adds up to about 500 communities that they're in, about 2,500 retail and commercial locations served across Western Canada and actually right up into Arctic Canada, which goes all the way up to into the Arctic Circle. There's a co-op in the most northern community. I might need a fact check on this, but the most northern community in the world, I believe, that's populated.
So with all that and the scale of your organization, as I understand it, effectively the owners, like in any co-op, are the members. The members are a part of the co-ops, and the co-ops, all of the co-ops effectively own collectively the federated co-ops. Is that kind of the structure?
Yeah. So just to put it simply, the co-op in my home city, if you're a member of that co-op, you're also an owner of that. So essentially you have a share or a stake or a vote. You can even show up to a board meeting and decide who runs that business and who represents you and what sort of things that co-op invests in. But you are a member. There's things that come with that, like if your co-op has a profit and it's able to share that, it shares it back with members at the end of the year. There's an equity account that you have as well that kind of gathers up over your lifetime. But you're a member in something bigger, a co-op, and you're an owner of that. So there's, like I said, there's about 160 of those individual co-ops. And if you're a member of your local one, you have all of those benefits to being part of that. And so all of those organizations, they also are part of the co-op that I'm part of, which is Federated Co-op. So they all own a share or a stake in that larger co-op. And so what we do is supply them. So we supply, fuel, because a lot of the co-ops sell fuel and petroleum. We supply agriculture products to the ones that work in rural areas. We supply food to the ones that run grocery and food stores. We supply building supplies to the ones that run home centers for contractors and DIYers. So that's kind of our role. And then just to support them overall in different things like marketing and finance and all the things that you need to run a business. So together we call ourselves a federation. So that's where the Federation of Federated Co-op comes out. And it's a really interesting business model. The layers to it are actually one of the reasons why I was attracted to joining it. I found that really interesting as a communicator. I have worked for top-down businesses and organizations. I've worked for large governments before where, one person at the top says go and everybody figures out how to make that happen. But in a cooperative model, it's almost the opposite. It's a bottom-up, people-first approach, and you really have to persuade. I use that in a good way, not a deceptive way, but you have to use persuasive communications and collaboration in order to come together and to do something meaningful. There's a large recent research study that was done internationally on cooperatives, and they found that cooperatives do tend to take a little bit longer to make a decision, which sometimes can be a competitive disadvantage. But long term, they tend to make really good decisions, and they tend to make decisions that stick. Because once you've gone through that process and you've got everyone on board, you tend to be really committed to it. So I found that really fascinating, and I didn't necessarily know everything I was getting myself into when I signed up, but it's been a great ride. I really appreciate being part of an organization that is a values-based organization, and it can do that while still providing real value to real people. So things, basic human needs like food and fuel and all those pieces, we supply all of that, but we also do a lot of good in the communities where we operate and reinvest back in them. So all of those are really great things. I'm proud to be part of that. And as a communicator, like I said, it presents a unique but really interesting challenge that I appreciate, and it gets me up every day and going and trying to figure it out.
When it comes to the public relations side, and when you've got so many stakeholders internally, rather than a board and a leadership and, here, boom, this is our strat plan, there's got to be a lot more negotiation that goes on, as you hinted at, before any assets can be put together. And then is it a case of iteration? Is it a case of revision and then presenting? Or once a strategic direction's done, is it then handed over to your team to make it happen?
Yeah, there's a lot packed into that question, so I'll do my best to unpack it. But I guess to the first part about sort of the negotiation part of it, it's a small p political scenario, I would say. So anytime you have a group of independent people, or in this case, a group of independent organizations, there is negotiation, there's trying to build understanding, and there's that persuasive piece, like I mentioned. So we have to go through that process on a lot of large initiatives. When it comes to marketing, communications, brand, the simplest way we boiled it down, and I can't take credit for this, it was another leader in our organization who really boiled it down to, we try and centralize for efficiency and localize for effectiveness. So we each have our role to play. The group I work with, Federated Co-op, we try and take the centralized for efficiency approach. So what can we provide that provides consistency, provides a standard, then, and kind of provides an umbrella, so to speak, to work under for all of those individual co-ops, and then they localize it. So, which I feel, and our model is based on the belief that that localization aspect is really what makes us different, and it's localization in a meaningful way. Right down to the money that's reinvested back into individual communities, and it never leaves those communities. It's a cycle that happens in those communities. But even from a communications and brand and marketing perspective, the message is, the high level message is there, but each one can localize it so that it's meaningful to them and their community. And there was a time, I would say, when there was sort of a draw to the warm glow of the competitors' model of pushing out one message and trying to fit everyone inside that one message box, it didn't really work very well, to be honest. And so there was a major effort put forward almost a decade ago to really reinvest in our central brand as co-op. So most people even just say co-op. They don't even say which local co-op they're part of. They just say co-op, but to them it's their local co-op. But then we really started trying to find new ways to have central messages that everyone can work under and can work towards and localize in the best way possible. So, and we really found the most success when we actually live that out and try that out and use that and build on that. Recent example is we have a lot of co-ops that have gas stations that sell petroleum and fuel and diesel right across Western Canada. And so on the community investment side, asked how can we all come together in a way that's meaningful so that we reinvest. So we chose one day a year in September that we call Fuel Good Day. And so that was kind of the central rallying point. And on that day, each of those co-ops decides how much per liter of fuel will go towards a cause in their community that their community has selected. And so it ends up, generating millions of dollars in donations to nonprofit organizations in communities and in ways that matter in each community, not because I, from a central office decided it was the charity of choice, but because it was meaningful there. And on the communication side, the public relations side, it's been fantastic. Like we'll get 2 to 3 times the results of something that we would do centrally, because what is shared in the community, the causes, the people there, it's all meaningful to them. So local media, social media, the people following those co-ops, they really identify with it way more than when we try and, read the wind of what might be appealing to everyone, which is never a great strategy. So we've just seen really fantastic results when we're able to come up with that umbrella that works for everyone, that they can localize and make meaningful in their local communities. And that's our secret sauce. That's what we keep trying to tweak and formulate every time we look at a marketing or communications or brand effort.
There must be almost, I would say, a communication Bible or an established work plan that these are the centralized assets. There's the flexibility. So like in local radio, when I was back in local radio, we would have the overarching branding and then the local tags that would go into it, plus localized messaging sponsored or whatever it may be. Is it along those lines? And second part, because I'm a fan of follow-up questions, where is the boundary when things aren't necessarily going so well? Let's say there's an issue in the local market, a crisis, or just something to pay attention to. Where's the line between you providing additional support, or where is it left locally?
Yeah, so the first point, good analogy with the radio piece. So if we extend that analogy or metaphor, it's sort of like a giant donut ad for radio. So, on all aspects of it. So we try and provide, and we have a sort of a central hub for, visual resources, creative resources that can set a standard there. But more and more with the tools that everyone has available now, some of the software and the technology and the cloud-based platforms we have, it's not sort of a static piece. You can bake certain parts of your brand and your logo and your campaign into that, and then there's lots of customization and localization that can happen below that. So that's really what we try and do, kind of on the high level, on all sorts of aspects. And then really we try and provide, we call them toolkits, but it's really that, just sort of the essentials in terms of what we would consider best practice and guides, and whether that's branding guidelines or whether that's on the communication side with messaging. on different topics. So an example would be sustainability. Here are some key themes, key messages, key points that we see and have asked our co-ops for input on in terms of what's common between us that we can all speak to. And then below that, they come up with their own unique and usually much better and more creative ways to use those messages and kind of add the color and character and story behind them. So that's sort of the high level on that point. The challenge with our model is the challenge that you raised in your follow-up question. So it's where's the line? And so for us, it's sort of an ongoing give and take challenge to work out within ourselves. Is that the strength of brand sometimes also causes confusion or misunderstanding about who we are. And what we're really concerned about is not losing the localness, to use that term, in the push for a central and really strong brand. And we're constantly keeping our ear to the ground, figuratively, but through analytics and otherwise, to monitor where that conversation's at. We hear it a lot, especially probably in smaller communities where they start equating, because you have a strong brand, that you're the same as other companies that have a strong brand, the big names that everyone knows. And so it's really hard to bring that back and say, no, you're still true to yourselves and your community. That's the way it works. We just have a strong identity together. So it's a constant challenge when it comes to things like you mentioned, like crises. It just adds another layer of complexity. So we have, like all large organizations or networks of organizations, complex issues. So if there's a crisis in one, sometimes if you're on the other end, the interpretation is, because I'm in this part of Western Canada, it must be the same thing that's going on as over there, when a lot of cases it's not. It is localized. But, there can be confusion that way. So really we try and do our best to work directly with local co-ops in those situations and help speak to it in terms of a brand, to help understanding of here's kind of the big picture, but then here's why this is actually a local issue. And we work with the local co-ops in that case to sort of not isolate it, but to really focus it on the area where it is.
Cam, this has been fascinating. I hope to reconnect with you on a future episode of Fuse. There are so many things that I'd like to discuss, and maybe we'll be able to get you onto a panel, which would be really fascinating. If people wanted to find out more information about you as the business professional you are, which social network, and I'm guessing it might be LinkedIn because everyone else has said this, which network could they find out more information and maybe get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely, LinkedIn. That's probably dating myself for the younger members of your audience, but definitely LinkedIn is the best way to get in touch with me personally.
And for people who want to know more about the co-op structure as an organization, federated co-ops, what's the best source of information for that?
Sure. Two different spots for the federation and kind of understanding how it all fits together. Website, www.fcl.crs. And on the consumer side, to see what the brand looks like and how this interesting collection of independents, another website, www.coop.crs. Either of those have a really clean way of kind of putting together the pieces. One's more from that corporate or kind of overarching perspective with FCL, and then the coop.crs one is from a consumer perspective. You can see sort of how the brand all fits together.
Cam, thank you so much for coming on to Fuse. It's painted a clearer picture for me as to the challenges and the opportunities that you have as an organization, and just how, I think that there are a number of people that I've spoken to who, when they're looking at working in different parts of marketing, PR, communication, they some exclude working in the cooperative space because it feels quite complex. And I think you've broken down some barriers here. Cam Zimmer, thank you so much for joining us here on Fuse.
Thanks so much, Dan. I appreciate the time.
Thank you for listening to the latest episode of Fuse. Please do share this episode with friends and colleagues. And of course, you can find previous episodes at prca.org.uk/Fuse.